Women did not report feeling less hungry or eat less.
We believe that estradiol and progesterone is related to things like the food people eat and the calories that they burn. I'm an energy balance scientist. I have to say it's incomplete.
And what she found complicates one of the most repeated pieces of weight loss advice out there. Aside from a breast cancer experiment, we also get into research on the menstrual cycle, the cycle syncing trend, and whether your appetite and metabolism shift depending on where you are in your cycle. This is Dr. Sarah Purcell.
My name is Dr. Sarah Purcell. I'm an assistant professor and Tier 2 Canada Research Chair at the University of British Columbia. My research investigates energy balance, so the food we eat and the calories we burn, and more specifically, things like appetite and energy intake requirements on the dietary intake side, and things like resting and physical activity energy expenditure on energy expenditure side. And we're primarily interested in those in people with obesity and in the context of ovarian sex hormones.
Your study was done on breast cancer survivors specifically. So I was wondering what made that population scientifically interesting for studying hunger and exercise, and why has nobody studied them before?
It's a great question. So with estrogen and progesterone receptor positive breast cancer cases, the standard of care for treatment for premenopausal women is suppression of those hormones, so estrogen and progesterone, for a number of years. And that's extremely effective at treating the cancer. However, we believe that estradiol and progesterone is related to things like the food people eat and the calories that they burn. And my lab's not the first to show that specifically, but things like appetite and energy metabolism hasn't really been investigated thoroughly in that population. And so that was one of the reasons why we decided to study them.
Can you walk me through what actually happened at the study? What did the women do, and what were you measuring, and how did you design it to get accurate results?
It's a great question. So we follow what has been done in previous literature in which we bring people into the lab so we can control as many factors as possible. Because with diet and appetite studies, if you think about recalling what you ate, it's quite hard to do that. And so often in our research, we do both. So we bring people to the lab where we can actually measure it accurately, we can weigh everything back, and then we also ask them what they're eating. So for this study, what we did was we brought people in, we told them to fast in the morning. We did a fasting measure of their resting metabolism, which is the calories you're burning at rest and just breathing, keeping your heart rate going, things like that.
Mhm.
And then we did a fasted blood measure of appetite hormones and assessed how hungry and full they were at that time. Then we gave them a standard breakfast. And then shortly after that breakfast, the participants exercised. They did resistance exercise. It took about an hour or so. And then after that, for the next 2-ish hours, every few minutes, we would take another blood draw and ask them about their appetite. And then at the end of that, we gave them a huge plate of food and asked them to eat as much or as little as they wanted. And then we weighed that back. This study was mostly in lab measurements, which is really accurate, but it may not apply to free living settings. And then we also asked them to eat the same thing before each study visit, if possible, so that we can at least somewhat control for what they were eating before coming.
Speaking of food, may I ask what specifically they ate prior to
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, so this study was done on the University of Colorado. And so during the study, breakfast, I think we had 2 or 3 different options. It was like eggs and toast or like a yogurt bowl or something. But that standardized breakfast was controlled for by according to their body weight and their physical activity level, just in free living, because we wanted that to be controlled because we wanted to see the effect of the exercise, not necessarily their breakfast. That was the breakfast meal. And then for lunch, it was like a pasta type meal. I think there was like a salad and a cookie of some sort and sodas. And it's pretty standard-ish according across different sites. Even at UBC, when we do our studies, we keep breakfast very simple.
Mhm.
Sometimes we involve a bar or something just to keep it easy for us to calculate that. And then lunch is usually pasta or some kind of sandwich or something like that, because the purpose is to really keep it somewhat neutral. We don't want to give people their favorite foods and we don't want to give them their least favorite foods because then that can bias our results.
And why did you guys choose resistance training specifically?
It's a great question and one that me and my mentors and collaborators went back and forth with quite a bit. With cancer treatment and cancer survivorship, there's often a decrease in muscle. And this obviously it varies person to person, it varies by the type of cancer, but resistance exercise becomes really important for maintaining that muscle because muscle is associated with a whole host of positive outcomes like physical function, metabolic function, all the good things that we all want, right? And so that's one of the reasons. Another reason is that there's a lot of research on aerobic training already, not necessarily in breast cancer, but the majority of that research that looks at the link between appetite and exercise is aerobic training. And so we wanted something that's applicable to breast cancer survivors and also focused on muscle health and adds another dimension to the literature.
Thank you. I think in the study, your hormone data showed that ghrelin goes down and POI goes up after the resistance exercise, but the woman did not report feeling less hungry or eat less afterwards. Do you think you can walk me through what you think is happening in the actual biology and the behavior of the participants?
Absolutely. And you've hit on something that's really controversial in the field of appetite research. I think you hit the nail on the head because we often see this, the mechanisms that's driving appetite may be different, but then what people are actually reporting may not be different. And it's also really important to keep in mind that I think one of the things we're seeing is that we're only looking at appetite over 3 hours. And we might see changes in hormones during that time, but whether or not that translates to free living environment is it's a different question almost. And so I don't want to throw the visual analog scales. That's what we use for hunger, satiety, and fullness. With respect to food consumption, those are certainly important because sometimes we do get signals from that. But often they require a lot larger sample sizes, so we're a little bit underpowered for those self-reported measures of appetite as well. So I think what's happening, there's a lot of things. So it's not that they're necessarily working in different directions. It's almost like we're measuring the apple and the orange, answer the same research question. It's just different aspects of it.
Yeah.
So I think it could be sample size, I think it could be environment, as well as just the mechanisms that we're looking at.
Since your research was done on breast cancer survivors, I think low estrogen was not really unique to that population, I believe. Nowadays, young women who crash diet or do excessive cardio or on certain contraceptives can also end up in a low estrogen state. So I guess one can assume that your findings can also apply to these women. Is that correct? Or
Potentially, I
potentially?
think when if a premenopausal female or woman goes on estrogen suppression therapy or progesterone suppression, hormone suppression therapy for breast cancer, that's a really potent stimulus. Their estradiol and progesterone levels are essentially putting them in a postmenopausal state. And it's a very powerful stimulus. Now, that's different than what we would see across a normal menstrual cycle or potentially with prolonged energy restriction. And oral contraceptives are really interesting because they actually, how they work is they interact with your hypothalamus, which is a region in your brain, and they disrupt ovulation at the brain level.
Okay.
But they expose individuals to higher levels of progestin, which is the synthetic form of progesterone, and a little bit higher estradiol. Just obviously differs according to contraceptives. And so it's not necessarily like a low, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Now, to answer your question, I think what you're really getting at is these crash diets and how that relates to hormone health. Is that kind of correct in
Yeah.
my assumption? Okay, that's like And I will
Yeah.
preface this by saying I'm not an endocrinologist at all,
Mhm.
but I think what often happens is if an individual goes on these crash diets, they're exercising a lot over the long term, they could potentially end up in a state of relative energy deficiency in sport or REDS. And what this means is that there's a lot of, they're not eating enough relative to their physical activity. This is different than if someone is slowly losing weight very gradually. This is pretty dramatic, high levels of activity. And so this can have implications for ovarian sex hormones negatively. It can also impact a lot of other symptoms and it's a whole host of things. So it's not just your ovarian symptoms. So to answer your question, yes, what that looks like for an individual person is that 5 kilometers every day, and I don't even want to put a number on the calories in, but it varies by person. And it's hard to say if that relates to losing fat or not. At the end of the day, energy in, energy out, right? But there's so much nuance in that of what's causing it. I would encourage anyone who is really in that phase of crash dieting and exercising a lot, you could be potentially getting into the territory of disordered eating, which is one of the major mental health conditions, like one of the most dangerous mental health conditions. And a true crash diet only lasts a few days, but then it's, yeah, like, ooh, what is that doing if it's repeated? I don't know. So that was a really long, drawn out answer. Like, yes, it could potentially impact your hormones. How it does that and to what extent depends on the context.
What does the what do you think the wellness and fitness industry consistently get wrong about exercise and weight loss from a researcher's perspective? That's what I'm like quite curious about because we're always consuming all this information online and through certain marketing gimmicks, right? Is the eat less, move more advice wrong, or do you think it's just incomplete as of now?
It's such a good question. I think overall, what really frustrates me is these quick fixes. And I get it because people on social media and wellness and fitness industry, they want to sell you something, right? And people want to buy things that are big and sexy and exciting, and they want that complete transformation in 12 weeks or whatever. Unfortunately, the research says that weight loss definitely important. It can help with a lot of metabolic outcomes. The hard part is maintaining that weight loss. And so I think a lot of people don't really think about, okay, after 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 6 months or whatever, how am I going to maintain that? Because it's quite hard. And so I think there's a real lack of awareness and implementation of lasting behavior change in the weight loss phase that would set people up for success. I also think that there's a lot of myths of what is achievable in a reasonable amount of time. People have the best intentions with weight loss and weight change, body recomposition, everything. If you have no stress, or you work a perfect 9 to 5 job, like nothing goes wrong in your life for 6 months, that's all great. But like, when has that ever gone that way in your life? And I think that people often don't think about how they're going to overcome challenges that happen personally, professionally, and how they can fit behavior into these lifestyle changes. And so, to answer your second question of is the eat less, move more advice actually wrong or just incomplete? I'm an energy balance scientist. I have to say it's incomplete because really, like, we all know you can't change physics. The laws of thermodynamics is can't energy cannot be created nor destroyed, right? Like it is really energy in and energy intake or energy in, energy out. But it's so complex. There's a huge behavioral component to that. There's a metabolic component. There's a psychological component as well. I'm going to stop there because I can really get into what
Okay.
annoys me
Yeah.
specifically, but I think that's a good overview.
Okay. Maybe another time.
Yeah.
So you also co-authored a study looking at whether appetite and food intake actually differs across menstrual cycle phases.
There's been a fair amount of research that has looked at energy intake and energy metabolism in different cycles of the menstrual cycle, particularly in the late follicular phase, which is high estrogen, and in the mid luteal phase, which is progesterone dominant. And generally, what they found is that energy intake is higher in that progesterone dominant phase, so like later in your cycle. And resting metabolic rate is a little bit higher as well during that phase. However, a lot of those research studies had used self-reported data. So again, not the best, rife with a lot of issues, and very few had measured both RMR, so resting metabolic rate, and energy intake together, and in person and free living settings. So we tried to do the best we could in controlling all of these factors. And with this study, my poor master's student, like she did such a wonderful job. And as a scientist, you really want to see like those P less than 0.05.
Oh,
So you want significant results, of course, but we didn't really find any differences. We found a few trends. So, for example, resting metabolic rate was trending towards being higher in that mid-luteal phase, but we weren't really powered for that. And so I think what this tells us is that when we actually control for a lot of these factors, when we weigh food before and after, actually giving participants food that's already pre-weighed that they consume in real life, we measure this, energy intake on average may not be different in these cycles. Now, this is not to say that is not true for individual patients or participants or individuals. We had individuals who did actually consume a lot more during the luteal phase. We had people that didn't. And so I don't want this objective data to overshadow a subjective experience of someone.
I think, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's this trend where cycle syncing your diet and your workout routine. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's been a trend for years. It's
Yeah.
like
Really?
for many years, yeah. There was actually a systematic review that was just released, and I'm gonna mess up all of the details of it, but I can send you the link
Don't worry.
after if you email me and you
But
can put it in your show notes. But it was actually looking at this, is exercise performance different during the different cycles of a menstrual cycle? And really the only thing that was different in the systematic or this review is that people's perception of their symptoms was different. Actual physical performance was not. And so I think what this tells us is that people may not feel the best during certain parts of their cycle, and that's legitimate, right? That's not even who best to know your experience than yourself, right? So I think that's pretty powerful data. There is no research that I know of that has actually looked at certain types of diets better in one cycle phase or another. There was one study that was published a number of years ago. It was a weight loss study that did try to incorporate this. So eating more during your luteal phase and eating less during your late follicular phase compared to a standard weight loss diet, and they didn't show any differences in weight loss. And honestly, I think as a person and a researcher, I think it would probably just really complicate something that probably doesn't need to be that complicated. That being said, there tends to be general increases in hunger and food craving in the menstrual cycle from other studies during the luteal phase. And so I think on an individual level, potentially someone could consider that, but scientifically, there's not strong data to suggest that.
can you walk me through the most common approach women take to weight loss and explain specifically where that approach goes wrong based on what your research has shown?
This is a pretty broad question, and
Okay.
to be honest, I don't know if the research of that well. I'm sure someone somewhere has researched typical approaches that women prefer over men. There's probably research in that somewhere.
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't know. From what I would guess, I would imagine that women probably prefer to be in groups. They want that kind of the talking with someone. They want one-on-one time with someone to help lead them through. I would hypothesize that women probably want more weight loss and not, they don't really care as much about muscle.
Oh yeah.
I'm just hypothesizing here. And this is also just from what I've seen in my personal life. I think generally they want quick results. I don't think that's specific to women, I would think. And I think if I were to change anything, I think it's changing. I don't know. I'm an optimist. I think emphasis on muscle health is really important because especially young and middle life women, you can put on muscle when you're younger so much easier, and that is so important as we age. For a lot, I mentioned this earlier, like metabolic health, but even physical function, and even just what you look like when you do lose weight. And I think that there's historically been a real fear of women looking like those huge bodybuilders. I don't think they
Mhm.
understand the amount of work that goes into that. That is a lot of work. And unless you're targeting that, it's not what you're going to look like with strength training at all. And then there's also this, conversely, there's also this myth that muscle builds or muscle uses all of these calories and all of this energy. And it does, but it's usually a lot less than people think. And so I think emphasis on muscle training, very gradual weight loss too, this crazy crash diet. It's
Mhm.
not good for your health, it's not good for your muscles. It's probably not going to last. It's not sustainable. I don't want to be the pessimist here, but that's what we show time and time again. And so I think slow, gradual weight loss that incorporates resistance training and aerobic training. And
Mhm.
it's just the basics of nutrition, right? It's fruits, vegetables, lean protein, thinking about your behaviors as well, like eating with others, not eating out as much. Things like that are really important.
What is one thing about hunger, hormones, and body composition that you wish every young woman understood?
Oh, that's hard. Hunger is normal. It's not bad. I think a lot of young women really feel pressure to be extremely thin,
Mhm.
especially with the advent of these GLP-1 agonists. Unfortunately, the anorexic thin is back in style, which I hate.
Mhm.
But hunger is normal. Hormones, I think women a lot of times may feel out of control with their hormones, and to a certain extent, that's true. But I think understanding your fluctuations is important. And then if you ever feel like something's wrong or off, talking to your doctor, you may have to advocate a little bit for what you think is wrong, but listening, seeking guidance from qualified healthcare professionals, really important if you think your hormones or if something's off. And body composition. I think slow and steady wins the race. Don't forget resistance training. Listen, I don't like going to the gym all the time either, but like even just 20 minutes, strength training, really important. Protein is really important. It's way easier to get protein now. They put protein in sodas and stuff. I don't know if you've seen this. Protein's
Mhm.
in everything right now. It's absurd. But that's good because it's going to help you maintain your lean muscle. And then if you are targeting weight loss, slow and steady, you really want to maintain that muscle. And when you lose weight, you are going to lose muscle, but mitigating the amounts of that is really important through diet and exercise.
Where is this field going in the next 5 to 10 years? And what would more research funding actually allow you to find out?
That's a great question. So I'm going to start with my research in the next
Okay.
5 to 10 years because I think it's pretty relevant. And we've been very fortunate in the last year to get funding from the government through INSERT and CHR to
Mhm.
study how oral contraceptives are affecting appetite and dietary intake and metabolism in different contexts. So, for example, in healthy people, like how does diet and exercise impact responses to, or how did responses to diet and exercise interventions affect appetite? And then also how weight loss with oral contraceptive pills versus not affects appetite, diet, metabolism. And hopefully, I think that I'm one of many researchers who are studying the effects of some of these exogenous hormones, so oral contraceptive pills and the hormone replacement therapy during menopause. And I think in general, these GLP-1 agonists is really just completely flipped, the obesity world on its head. I think there's going to be a lot more research on how that affects things like muscle and metabolism, but then also who is it best to use these in? How long can they be in? Can we use it in different populations, like older adults, without it having negative side effects? Things like that. And then I think there's going to be a lot more awareness in terms of athletes of preventing the relative energy deficiency before. But if you ask a different researcher in this area, they might have different answers. And I think I have a little bit of a bias, but I think that's where it's going.
What do you think doing this research, specifically the one you did with breast cancer survivors, changed about how you personally approach exercise and nutrition?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think my work with breast cancer survivors really made me extremely fortunate that I can move my body and eat the food that I want in a way that is meaningful to me. Because until you know someone who goes through any kind of cancer treatment, it's rough and it really brings to light like, what really matters. And it's not all about weight. I know I study weight, and that's where a lot of the research is going. We hear research all the time, like overweight and obesity are public health issues. But at the end of the day, those vanity pounds really don't matter. I think what matters is eating a healthful diet, but don't forget to indulge every once in a while and move your body in ways that align with guidelines, but also it's what you really love to do.
Let me fit in one more question.
Okay, I'll keep it short.
Is there anything about your research that you feel is not being communicated properly to the public that you want to set the record straight right now?
I think just reflecting on our conversation and just the larger picture here, hormones are important, but they're one part of many. It's behaviors, it's your food environment, it's your culture, it's your genetics. There's so much that goes into what you eat. Hormones are important, but it's not the be all end all.